And I will walk us through the agenda and a presentation here. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the general plan is and the overall alternatives process. Then we're going to go through the land use alternatives in individual focus areas, and I'll explain all of those terms as part of the presentation. We have some time baked into this meeting at 3 different points throughout the process for you to ask questions and get your questions answered. And then we'll be wrapping up about an hour from now at 11. And as we're getting started, I just want to be clear that I want to introduce you today to this content so that you have the information and understanding to give us feedback using our online tool. If you visit our website at imaginelivermore2045.org, we have a preferred scenario online activity as well as a background report and an evaluation summary about these land use alternatives. So there is a lot of information in this presentation. You don't have to absorb it all. This presentation, as well as many more materials and an opportunity to give input through an online exercise, are at imaginelivermore2045.org. During the presentation, as questions come up for you, please use the chat function to send them to Cliff Lau. Cliff is going to be collecting our questions, and then when we have these pauses during the presentation, Cliff will use those questions from the chat to get your questions answered. So whenever they come up, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait to the question period. Just go ahead and type the questions in the chat. If you can, please do send them to Cliff so that he's the one person that's collecting them all, and we make sure we don't miss anything. So I'm going to keep going to talk a little bit about what the general plan is before we start talking in more detail about the land use alternatives. And before I tell you what it is, I just want to make sure that I've spent a moment telling you why it's important. The general plan is really the document that has a very powerful influence on how Livermore looks and feels and what our experience is when we visit Livermore or living and working in Livermore. So the general plan the Livermore that you experience today is strongly shaped by the existing general plan that was adopted almost 20 years ago. And so this general plan update is important because it's your chance to shape the future of the next 20 years of Livermore. More technically, what the general plan is the fundamental land use and development policy document for the city. It shows how the city will grow and at the same time be able to conserve important natural and other resources. It establishes the community vision for the physical form of the city. And by adopting a set of goals and policies and actions to shape those physical decisions, it really sets a framework for fair and consistent decision-making by staff, by the Planning Commission and other commissions and committees, and of course, by the City Council. This is such an important document that California actually requires every city and county in California to have a general plan so that there is clarity and predictability and planning ahead for sustainable growth in all of California's communities, including Livermore. We started out the general plan update process with a visioning phase that included a number of community outreach events, as well as a statistically valid community survey. And the input from all of those sources gave us the ideas for a general plan vision that was ultimately approved by the City Council to guide our work throughout the general plan update. So we always like to start off meetings for the general plan by reminding ourselves of what the vision was. It's shown here on the screen, and it really talks about Livermore as a place with a big heart and where families and individuals can flourish. The vision is also supported by several guiding principles that express in a little bit more detail some of the ideas that really resonated with Livermore residents in our outreach process. And those include things like prosperity, housing, resiliency, diversity, and the arts as important components of Livermore as a community today, and something that people want to continue and enhance and expand in the future. The general plan vision is going to be expressed in all the different parts of the general plan. Today, we're going to be talking really specifically about land use, but the general plan covers many additional topics, not only land use. So as you can see on this slide, it also covers things like, excuse me, transportation, noise, public safety, community character, economic development. All of these topics, of course, are very closely interrelated, and it's going to be an important step in the process to make sure that the general plan is consistent across all of these elements or different chapters or components of the general plan. So with that information and understanding about what the general plan is, I want to just explain a little bit more about the specific phase of the general plan update that we are engaged in right now. We're working on what we call alternatives, and the alternatives are exploring different ways that Livermore might develop in the future. So just to state kind of what we feel is obvious, but make sure we're all on the same page, why do we need to plan ahead for the future? And what are some of the most important things that we need to think about as we're planning for Livermore's future? One thing is planning for adequate housing options. When we did that survey that I mentioned earlier for the visioning process, one of the single top concerns for Livermore residents was the cost of housing and the availability of different types of housing. So we know that housing is a significant concern for Livermore residents. And we also know that there are very specific requirements in state law for the city to plan for accommodating housing at all income levels. That's a requirement, again, for every city and county in California. So that's an important piece that we want to use this general plan to look ahead to do, because the city is going to be asked to do that during the lifetime of this general plan. Land use is also very closely related to the financial sustainability of the city. Decisions about what type and amount of development happens in Livermore are directly related to both the revenue that the city can expect from things like property taxes and sales taxes and development fees, as well as the costs that the city will be obligated to from things like providing public services and infrastructure to serve new development. So we need to think very carefully as we're planning the future to ensure that it's happening in a way that is fiscally sustainable for the city. We've heard consistently from Livermore residents about the importance of fostering high quality job creation so that folks who live in Livermore have the opportunity to work in Livermore, and also so that folks who want to own businesses or start businesses in Livermore can have the workforce available and the other things that are necessary to support local businesses. So all of these things are part of what we're thinking of when we're working on achieving the community's vision by considering potential land use changes. When we talk about the land use alternatives, we're really thinking about the general plan land use map. This is an important piece of the general plan. It's a map that covers all of the property in Livermore, and the colors on this map represent land use designations that determine what can be built, where, and at what density or intensity. So if you own property in Livermore, or if you live next to a property in Livermore, this map is one of the main tools that helps to drive the range of options for what can happen with that land in the future. A lot of the colors on this map are going to stay the same. If you look at something like the Isabel neighborhood specific plan area, for example, in the northwest part of the city, or the downtown area, those have been subject to intensive planning efforts in the relatively recent past, and we're not planning to change the outcomes of those processes as part of this process, the general plan update process. But there are some parts of town, and those we're calling focus areas, where we think some land use change is likely to happen over the next 20 years, and we want to explore some options or some alternatives for that. So we've identified 5 focus areas, and I'm going to show those on a map in a few minutes, and developed 3 land use alternatives where the designations and uses might change to explore kind of a range of different possibilities for that change. So different ways of accommodating jobs, housing, services, and parks and open space within those 5 focus areas. We're then going to think about those alternatives, the pros and cons of each, what we like, what we don't like, mix and match the best ideas from the alternatives, or maybe new ideas that you bring to us, to create what we call a single preferred scenario. And then that preferred scenario within the 5 focus areas will be integrated with the rest of the citywide land use map to create the general plan land use map that will be considered in a draft form, and that will be analyzed through a draft EIR, or environmental impact report, in the next phase of the project. So as we're thinking about how the city regulates land use, I also want to be really clear that that is far from the only factor that determines what will happen in Livermore or how Livermore will look and feel in 2045. City regulations and public investment in things like infrastructure are 2 very important factors in shaping the city, but there are other very important factors as well that can be just as influential. Those are things like global or national or regional economic forces that drive what types of development is profitable, or what types of businesses people want to open, what types of housing is most in demand, for example. Private property owner decisions about how and when to develop their own land, which can be attributed to many, many different factors that are very hard to predict. And of course, community input. Once a project is proposed, the community has a chance to react to that and give their input as it's being considered by staff or the planning commission or the city council. So I just want to be clear that the choices that we make today, or excuse me, we're not making any choices today, but the choices that we make as part of the land use alternatives process, and ultimately on the general plan land use map that gets adopted by the city council at the end of this general plan process, are very important, but they do not mandate change. They're not going to require anybody to go out and tear down a building and build a new kind of building. All of those things will happen gradually over time as the market and private property owners decide on different decisions at their own pace. And I just want to mention too that I talked about the importance of community input in shaping development. Community input has been a very strong focus of the general plan update throughout the process. We've heard a number of comments through the pop-up events that we've been doing, through online comments, through public comments at our public meetings, through many, many, many pop-up events where we engage with the community where they are. So we've heard that people want to maintain a small town feel, that they really value their connections in Livermore. As I said earlier, add a variety of housing that is affordable to different income levels, focus on looking at vacant infill sites to accommodate future growth, support a strong local economy, and also adding more parks, open space, and bikeways. We considered that input and other technical sources in creating a land use alternatives evaluation. Again, this is available online at imaginelivermore2045.org. It considered a range of different topics that are important to Livermore residents, and compares kind of the performance and the pros and cons of the alternatives across all of these different topic areas. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested in some or all of these issues. Just to be clear about where we are, today this is one step in our overall moment of identifying a preferred scenario for further study. We're going to be continuing to meet with the General Plan Advisory Committee, the Planning Commission, and the City Council, and share with them the input that we have heard today, as well as through other sources of input on the land use alternatives and the preferred scenario, before we make decisions about a draft general plan land use map that we're then going to study further in the general plan EIR. So with that, we have arrived at our first break for questions. So I'm going to ask Cliff if we've had any questions come in so far. Oh, Cliff, you're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Mic check. Yep. Hello.
I hear you.
Sorry about that. So I received one message from Matt Gilbert, and it's more of a comment than a question. And he writes, I feel like there is not sufficient I feel like there is not sufficient housing stock for the people who already work here to own homes, let alone to support additional job creation. My wife and I live in the county for a decade, both work locally in town in Livermore, and do not have a realistic pathway to own a home.
Thanks for that comment, Matt. And yeah, just to note that we can definitely use this time to answer questions, but we're also taking comments through the chat. So we welcome your either questions or comments. So that wasn't a question, but just to respond to it, we, as I mentioned in the presentation, this concern about the high price of housing in Livermore and the many different negative impacts that that has on the community is definitely something that we've heard throughout the general plan process. And in a lot of different aspects, folks who would like to be able to live in Livermore and aren't able to, folks who run businesses in Livermore and aren't able to keep employees because their employees can't afford housing. It has a number of different ways that it affects the community. It's definitely a big part of the general plan that we're going to be tackling. And as I start to get into the land use alternatives, you'll see that one way that we're reacting to that input that we've heard is by looking to the focus areas as potential locations for future housing, including housing at a range of densities. So yes, some single family housing, like the majority of housing is in Livermore today, but also continuing to expand the city's stock of higher density housing, smaller units, attached units, in an attempt to create more affordable housing in Livermore and respond to that kind of input that we've heard consistently throughout the process. Any other questions coming in?
I have not received any other questions or comments.
Okay. I'm going to keep going through our presentation. I think when we get to the land use alternatives, there might be more questions. So I want to make sure we leave time to address those as well. So let me start to talk about the land use alternatives. I'm going to give you an overview of the land use alternatives, and then we'll talk about three of our smaller kind of focus areas. So I've said this term focus areas a couple of times now. That are the places in Livermore that we think are most likely to experience change over the next 20 years. And there's a range of different reasons why this might be. Some of them have large areas of undeveloped or underutilized land. Some of these focus areas are served by existing or planned transit or infrastructure. For example, in case you weren't aware, BART in the past had considered coming to Livermore, and one of our focus areas was a place where BART owned quite a bit of land with the anticipation of future future station. That's our Laughlin Road area out here on the east side. BART is not coming to Livermore. BART's board of directors has made that decision. So at this point, with the new general plan update, we're going to be looking at a different regional transit that's called Valley Link that's planned to connect the Central Valley with the Bay Area through Livermore in the 580 corridor. And these green station and this magenta station are both future Valley Link station sites. In addition, of course, there's existing ACE transit and this red station and the gray station are our ACE stations. So you can see, for example, here that this area, which we're calling the Midtown focus area, has two different transit stops. That's one of the things that we think is likely to drive change in this area over the next 20 years. Other focus areas like Vasco Row are already kind of starting to transition in a way that seems positive, and we want to see what we can do to foster ongoing transition in those areas. Ultimately, these 5 focus areas were identified with input from the community and the direction from the city council. And these are the 5 we're going to be talking about today. As I start to explain the alternatives, I just want to also orient you to how we draw these and illustrate them and what they mean. So I'm just showing this one focus area and one alternative as an example. I'm going to be walking through several maps. The colors on the maps correspond to what we're calling place types. And each place type is represented by some images on the place types menu. Again, if you go to our website, you can see the full menu with all of the different colors and the different pictures and information about density and intensity. So this yellow and brown stripe, for example, corresponds to a residential designation of medium high density, whereas the pink color on this slide is a mixed industrial, commercial and industrial designation. And the red and darker red stripes are wine country commercial designation. The green represents parks and recreation. And for each one of these focus areas, all of those different colors correspond to different amounts of housing and jobs that would be potentially expected to occur. So I'm going to start with one of our smaller and simpler focus areas. We call this Vasco Row. And here we're at the corner of East Avenue and Vasco Road. The existing general plan designations in this area are mostly light industrial west of Vasco Road and agriculture east of Vasco Road. This area, as you can see on the aerial, currently includes a mix of warehouses. There are some very traditional kind of light industrial businesses remaining back here, but there's also an emergence of commercial uses like wineries and breweries who want to host their customers, have events, maybe some entertainment. And so we're interested in continuing to support that transition that's already kind of starting to happen by creating a visitor destination that supports production and maker spaces that serve as a gateway to the South Livermore Valley wine country. So this could be wine and beer, it could be cheese, it could be coffee, related dining and entertainment uses. All three of the alternatives consider some configuration of that. But they also include different patterns as well. So in the Maker Village alternative on the far left, again, that yellow and brown stripe would add new residential uses to this area adjacent to the existing neighborhoods, and would also add a new park in the center along Research Drive. The production alternative, by contrast, all of that pink and red is different versions of mixed industrial and commercial or wine country commercial. So no new residential would be added under this production alternative. The wine country center alternative on the far right would also add residential that you see in that gold color, but it would really be concentrated in the northern part closest to East Avenue, as opposed to wrapping down throughout the edge of Research Drive like you saw in the Maker Village alternative. And the remainder of the space would be this wine country commercial. Again, we have a central green space in the wine country center alternative, but you can see that it's a little bit different shape and size than in the Maker Village alternative. So that's kind of an example of how we have three different land use alternatives. All of them are attempting to implement the same vision, but you can see that they're doing it in three different ways. So we have for each alternative, those maps correspond to different methods, different outcomes in terms of the amount and the type of development. As you can see here for these bar charts, the light green is our number of housing units. The gray bar would be new population, and the dark green is new jobs. So for Vasco Row, the Maker Village alternative would add the greatest number of new homes and residents and the least number of new jobs. The production alternative, as you saw, doesn't include any residential designation, so it wouldn't add any new homes or residents, and it would add the most new jobs. And then finally, the wine country center alternative is kind of in between those two in terms of both housing and jobs. I'm going to go next to the Laughlin Road focus area. The Laughlin Road focus area is mostly a vacant, undeveloped land. So this is 580 and North Front Road. As you can see here, this is the Greenville Road exit off of the north side of 580. A lot of this focus area is outside of the existing city limits, but it's all inside the existing urban growth boundary. We're not contemplating any changes to any boundaries as part of this focus area. I mentioned that a lot of this land is originally planned in the existing general plan as a future transit-oriented neighborhood in anticipation of a BART station. That BART station is not going to happen. And so we're using this general plan to rethink how this area might develop instead. So we have three alternatives, all of which preserve a significant amount of open space. If you compare that to the existing general plan, all of this area has different, almost all has different kind of residential designations, but on our alternatives, all of that would become an open space designation. And then we have three different versions of facilitating new compatible residential and commercial uses in the area that's within the city limits and closest to the existing roadways. So the open space alternative includes high density residential in the brown color with single family residential behind and some new light industrial designation along North Front. Mixed use alternative would have a strip of service commercial. That's this pink, neighborhood commercial in this pink color with bands of medium density and low density residential behind, and just limited spots for highway commercial at the off ramp. And then finally, the industrial alternative would add this purple industrial designation, as well as some high density residential and medium density residential connected by a linear greenway to the open space and to a new expanded commercial area. That translates into a build out, adding new jobs and housing under all three alternatives. So the open space alternative would add the most new housing and new residents and the fewest number of new jobs. The mixed use alternative would be more jobs focused and would add the least amount of new housing. The industrial alternative would again be in between the other two with a midpoint of housing and jobs. Whoops, advanced too fast. Okay, third focus area, and the last one I'm going to talk about before we stop for another set of questions. This is the Las Positas Court focus area. So again, this is a 580. This is kind of an open space that you see as you're driving driving east on 580. This is the Livermore Avenue exit here. The Chick-fil-A just went in this area. There's an existing cul-de-sac here. There's a post office, hotel back here. And this is Arroyo Las Positas that you can see on our aerial. So this is being considered for possibly revitalizing underutilized industrial office spaces, facilitating some housing in this area, improving connectivity and creating a strong entryway to Livermore, since again, this really is right there at the Livermore Avenue exit off of 580. The residential alternative would preserve the area between Las Positas Court and north of the Arroyo as open space. That's its current designation and current use, and then add some low density single family housing south of the cul-de-sac. The neighborhood center alternative would add an agriculture designation here, and this could potentially kind of be a visual cue for folks on 580 about Livermore's agricultural economy and heritage, adding medium density residential and neighborhood commercial south of the cul-de-sac. And then finally, the highway-oriented alternative would pretty significantly transform the undeveloped area into a mix of general industrial and mixed industrial office uses, really considering this as kind of a new job center. And south of the cul-de-sac would add the most intensive housing uses. This represents a medium high density residential cluster of new housing. So how does that look at build out? Both the residential alternative and the neighborhood center alternative would add pretty similar amounts of new jobs and 80 to 140 new homes. The highway-oriented alternative, as I said, is kind of the most intensive new development. It has the most new homes, as well as a pretty significant increase in jobs from developing that open space area with industrial and office type of uses. And that brings us to our second break for questions. So,
Um,
Cliff?
Audio check. You hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Great. I have two questions. One from John. John says that they're new to the area and has a question about the Laughlin Road area. If that area is outside the city limit, how can Livermore make decisions as to its use?
Sure. Let me answer that question in two ways, and Andy, certainly welcome you to jump in, of course. Let's go back to taking a look at the Laughlin Road area. So the area that is within the city limits is really this little triangle right here. Andy, I think I'm saying that correctly, right? And so if you look at our alternatives, that's the area that we focused on for our designations, is this kind of little triangle here. And the rest of this is shown in the green open space designation. In this case of Laughlin Road. However, it's also true that, so we're not really in the Laughlin Road area planning for development designations in the area that's outside the city limits. But doing that is not off the table as part of a general plan update. General plan law, again, requires cities and counties to plan for the future. And part of that is acknowledging that over time, many cities do grow beyond their existing boundaries. That might happen slowly or it might happen more quickly, depending on a lot of different factors. But it is something that happens as cities develop and evolve. And so the general plan does allow and even encourage cities to go outside of their city limits into what is called the sphere of influence and plan for what kinds of development they might like to see there. Now, until that land is part of the city, until it goes through the political and legal process of being annexed and we redraw the city limits, the city does not have any jurisdiction. But the general plan map is still an important indicator to, in this case, Alameda County, or to other surrounding cities of what Livermore believes is the appropriate use of that land. Because of course, even though that land isn't inside the city limits, it's right next to the city limits. And so it really has a strong effect on what happens inside the borders of Livermore, because it's right next to the community. So the general plan designations do not have any formal power on land that's not under the city jurisdiction, but they do have important symbolic use in communicating the cities and the community's vision for the future of that area that's right adjacent to existing Livermore neighborhoods and districts. I hope that helps. I don't know, Andy, if there's anything you want to add.
No, Joanna, that summed it up. I mean, the general plan, the earlier general plan land use map you showed, if we looked at it, actually does designate land around the city limits for the reasons you mentioned. We have the city limit boundaries, we have an urban growth boundary, we have a sphere of influence boundary, which signals an area where the city may annex in the future. Doesn't say what moment in time, but in the future. And then there's a fourth area that's called out in the general plan, and that's the planning area. And we designate within that area, as Joanna said, to signal to nearby jurisdictions of what Livermore's vision for that area is. And that allows the city to weigh in on other development applications from neighboring cities or the county.
Great question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Cliff.
We have another question. The last question is from Matt Gilbert. Is there any focus on building housing that is appropriate for the types of jobs are newly created and already exist in Livermore, rather than focus on commuters?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but let me take a stab.
I think
At
there's a
it.
word missing in probably what I read. Is there any focus on building housing that is appropriate for the types of jobs that are newly created and already exist in Livermore, rather than focus on commuters? Okay.
Sure. I think I would at least start an answer, and again, certainly, of course, always encourage you to jump in, Andy, by saying that Livermore today includes a range of jobs. We think that's important. We've heard that that's important to Livermore residents. There are some very, high tech and highly skilled jobs in Livermore. And there's also businesses downtown, for example, that need folks to wait tables and wash dishes, and that's an important part of Livermore's economy as well. There are a number of office jobs in Livermore. There are a number of retail jobs in Livermore. So today there is really, we see a pretty wide variety of different jobs that we need to be able to find housing that corresponds to. So I think already there's a need in Livermore for housing in a very wide range of types, from single folks all the way up to larger families, and for folks at many different stages in their lives. Many of them are working now. Others of them might be retired or students. And so I think that there is a need for a pretty broad range of housing. Right now, about 78% of the homes in Livermore are single family homes. And what we hear from the community is that there is a desire for a broader diversity of housing types for people who don't necessarily need or want a single family home at every stage in their life. So I think to answer your question, yes, there is a focus on thinking both about using these land use alternatives to provide a range of different places for different jobs and businesses to be located, and a range of housing types.
I do not have any other questions or comments.
Okay, we're going to have one more break for questions when I get to the end of the next two focus areas. And again, please also feel free to share your comments in the chat to Cliff. So we have two more focus areas to talk about. These are our two largest focus areas, hopefully by starting with some of the smaller areas where this starts to make a little bit more sense to you as we dive into some of the more complex The Midtown focus area is this area that is mostly along the south side of 580. There's a little bit of it that on the northern side of 580 here, including a commercial area and the existing mobile home park. It's kind of a triangle made by South Vasco Road, the railroad tracks, and First Street here. A lot of this area is, as you can see on the aerial, commercial. The Safeway is over here in this area. Or industrial, you can kind of see these warehouse footprints, some trailers out here. But there is also some housing transition starting to happen, including the Breesa neighborhood next to the existing Vasco Road A station here, and an approved but unbuilt housing project here. So we think that that a residential transition might continue to happen over time, and particularly be stimulated by the arrival of the future Valley Link regional rail station in the northern part of this area along 580. So again, these dots represent existing or future transit stations with a half-mile radius around those. And we want to respond to that in all of the alternatives by establishing a transit-oriented, complete neighborhood with a mix of housing, jobs, and services. So this area is already mixed, and we want to continue that mix, but maybe change kind of the proportions and the amount of the mix. The business center alternative, as you can see, that has kind of the most purple designations. That indicates the greatest continuation of the existing industrial and commercial uses. The brown on these maps is our highest density residential designation, and the gold is more of a medium density kind of designation. So thinking about what the existing Breesa neighborhood is, for example. The business center alternative is kind of the least amount of change to the existing pattern, but would still see a significant transition here next to the A station. The residential neighborhood alternative, by contrast, would represent the most significant transition from industrial to residential in this area. You can see significant amounts of the higher density residential designation represented by the brown, flanked by medium high density, and then transitioning out into medium density golden color, with the residential uses, the industrial uses concentrated in a relatively smaller area in the southern part of the focus area. And then finally, the blended alternative would, as its name implies, be kind of a mix of both, concentrating the residential transition here close to the future Valley Link station and retaining existing industrial designations farther east, closer to Vasco Road. North of 580, two of the alternatives would preserve the existing business park, the existing mobile home park. In the blended and the business center alternative, the residential neighborhood alternative would contemplate a higher density designation over time that would transition to more like apartments rather than mobile homes. How does that look in the numbers? The business center alternative, as I said, has the lowest number of new homes and new residents, but this is still a pretty high number when we compare it to the existing of an increase of about 4,700 new homes. The residential neighborhood alternative would add over 10,000 new homes, and the blended alternative would be between those at about 6,500 new homes. In terms of jobs, the business center alternative again would add the greatest number of new jobs and the fewest new homes. Residential neighborhood again focuses more on homes than jobs, so it has 4,700 new jobs. The blended alternative would have about 4,100 new jobs. So all are seeing an increase in all different kinds of development, but at different ranges. And then finally, the east of Greenville Road focus area. This is another large focus area. As its name implies, it is east of Greenville Road, which is shown here on the aerial. The southern end of this is about at East Avenue. So this is the labs right here. This is Patterson Pass Road right here. And the city limits and the urban growth boundary follow follow Greenville Road in this area. So this focus area is entirely outside of the existing city limits and the existing voter approved urban growth boundary. Right now it's designated in both the city's general plan and the County of Alameda general plan, primarily as large parcel agriculture. There are some public and utility uses out here like these water ponds. But that's the existing location and designation. You can see from the aerial, it's largely undeveloped in terms of structures. So when we look at something like the Midtown area, I just showed you 3 different alternatives that all to varying degrees would change that from continue the change that's already started to happen in that area from a primarily industrial and commercial area to an area that includes more of a mix of housing to some degree or another. So that implies housing replacing a land that right now holds jobs and businesses in Livermore. As we worked on the focus areas inside the city limits, we thought about the need to, again, support a strong economy in Livermore. And so with input from the community and the city council, we decided to take a look at east of Greenville as a possible place to establish land uses that support innovation and technology-based companies in a way that creates a complete district, and that would host a mix of jobs and services. This would help the city's long-term fiscal sustainability and is also an opportunity to create an inviting gateway to the South Livermore Valley wine country. So that's really the reason for considering east of Greenville. And as you can see in all of these alternatives, the different land use designations that are contemplated here are all only job generating land uses. So there's no residential in any of these alternatives. It would not be a place for new homes, but rather for new businesses or for existing businesses in Livermore to relocate. All of them are majority industrial, general industrial. That's the purple color that you see. Especially north of Patterson Pass Road. All of them also preserve existing public and utility uses in this kind of gray blue color. All 3 alternatives include some sort of configuration of an open space buffer and or agricultural land in the kind of medium green color that we're talking about. And also all 3 alternatives include a new idea of a research campus that might be a partnership with the labs or with the university system to really, again, take advantage of Livermore's unique economy and focus on innovation and technology, as it says in the vision. So this red and blue striped area in each one of the three alternatives is a different possible location and configuration for a new research campus. And then the dark green color in alternative B and C represents an idea for a regional sports park. That's something, again, we've heard about from Livermore residents and families as a need that's unmet right now in the community. And all three include a wine catalyst site at the southern end of the area. So again, as we've been mentioning in one of the earlier questions, right now this land is totally under the control of Alameda County. The county gets to decide what happens out here and approve or not approve development. And Livermore really has a limited opportunity to influence that. So this area would not become part of the city without both the vote of the people to change the urban growth boundary, and as I mentioned, the legal and political process to annex the land into the city. So this is a very long-term proposition. It would take many steps and many years, again, including a vote of the people. But the general plan update is a once in a generation opportunity to consider those kinds of significant changes. So we think it's important to take a look and really weigh the pros and cons carefully. One other important feature about this area, I mentioned the sphere of influence. That's kind of a legal boundary outside of the city limits, within which the county or other jurisdictions have to consult with the city. And so that boundary runs right here. That's the red dashed line. Most of the east of Greenville Road focus area is inside Livermore's sphere of influence, but there are parts of the area out here that are outside of the existing sphere of influence. Again, all of these alternatives are jobs only. There is no new housing. There are no new residents. And they are roughly comparable amounts of job growth, anywhere from 9,300 new jobs under alternative C, 10,000 under alternative A, 11,000 under alternative B. So with that, this is our third and final break for questions. And what can I help answer?
There are no questions or comments, Joanna.
I'm going to go through next steps, and then I think we're going to have a few minutes at the end. So I'm going to ask if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question or make a comment. Really appreciate all of your attention throughout this presentation and the questions that you've raised so far. Let me just talk briefly about the next steps in our process, and then give you a final chance to share your questions or thoughts. So like I said at the beginning, we understand that this is a lot of information for you to absorb, especially for those of you, for example, who are new to Livermore. So we do want to encourage you to check out the website at imaginelivermore2045.org. We do have the preferred scenario online activity there. So if you have any reactions, ideas, concerns about the different land use alternatives that I've presented today, this online activity is a place where you can go. You can look at these maps again at your own pace. You can look at the information in the evaluation summary. You can have a little bit more time to digest and absorb that and react to it. And then you can spend as much or as little time as you want to on the preferred scenario exercise. You can drop a pin on individual parcels and say what you think should happen there. Or you can simply click a button and say which alternative you prefer, or share your comments in writing. So really a lot of different ways to customize this. You can do one focus area, you can do all of them, however much time you have or want to spend. If you don't want to do this exercise, this link is also available, of course, to share with your friends and neighbors, anyone you know who might be interested in this process. So that online activity is going to be up on the website through December 15th. So you still have almost a month to take a look at that and provide some more input there. We're always receiving your questions and comments at our email address, gpupdate@cityoflivermore.net. There is a general plan advisory committee that has been meeting throughout this general plan project. All of their meetings are open to the public. They usually happen on Wednesday evenings, and their next meeting is going to be on Wednesday, December 13th. And then we are going to be taking preferred scenario discussion to the Planning Commission and to the City Council. Those meeting dates aren't firm yet, so I do encourage you to check the Imagine Livermore 2045.org website. That's where we're going to have all of the details about these meetings, dates, and times for your information. So again, thank you very much for spending part of your Saturday morning with us. We really appreciate it. We're very grateful for your interest in this process and for the questions and the comments that you've shared so far. And with that, we do have a few minutes left. So if anybody wants to raise your hand and ask a question or make a comment, I think we have time for that.
We did receive just one comment. I believe it was during the East of Greenville slides. There's a person wrote, "Thank you. This is exciting to see different options for lab use."
Okay, great. Yeah, I agree. This is an exciting moment. We get to really use our imagination and think big and maybe think outside the box. And maybe through the process, we kind of inch our way back into the box, but it's fun to be able to picture a lot of different ideas for how Livermore's future might look.
Hi, I'm curious about how the city gathers data on what the current residential population is like and what the working population is like in Livermore. How do we get that data? Because that seems like a very important piece of this puzzle is how you guys even get the information to work with.
Yeah, sure. If you are a person that is very interested in data, like we know many folks in Livermore are, and like I certainly am too, then I definitely encourage you to check out both the evaluation summary and the land use alternatives background report on the Imagine Livermore 2045 website. It does include a lot of the data that I've referenced today, but in much more depth and including sources. There are also existing conditions reports on the website that have, all of the kind of footnotes and citations that will refer you to the specific data sources. So you can really kind of go one by one and see for an individual number, where are we getting that from? But to answer your question more broadly, our general plan consultant team also includes an economist. And so, for example, for the jobs numbers, we do look at publicly available sources like the California Department of Finance, for example, or regional projections from MTC and ABAG about job numbers in Livermore, as well as the city's own records. And in addition to that, the economist also has access to private data sources with information about sales tax or transactions or employment levels. And so that can also help us to shape the picture of jobs in Livermore, not only how many jobs there are, but kind of in what sectors, things like commercial vacancy rates, for example. So there's certainly many multiple data sources that we consult for something like the economic and demographic sources. Similarly, for the population numbers, obviously the U.S. Census is an important source for that, but again, the California Department of Finance, ABAG's regional projections for both existing and expected population changes over time are some of the primary data sources that we consulted.
Joanna, we have another question from Matt. Says, what are your metrics for success?
Great question, especially with something like I'm guessing that you're asking about the success of the general plan, but there's a lot of different steps where we want to succeed at this. We want to succeed at including a lot of different voices and ideas in each step of our process. So here at the land use alternatives, and later as we get to developing policies and programs for the general plan. So I think success looks like in those phases, reaching a lot of different people and feeling like there are a diversity of viewpoints represented. This is our fourth kind of formal public meeting in this phase. And so I have at this point heard a lot of different folks, a lot of different ages and backgrounds. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. We're always looking for more voices to make sure we are successful at that. There's a bigger question about the success of the general plan. And I want to give Andy a chance to react to that because, you know, I am a consultant. I help communities write general plans for a living. But I do not work for the city, and I'm not going to be around over the next 20 years actually implementing this general plan as we see individual projects come in that we need to review, as the city has to make tough decisions about where to invest in infrastructure, for example. And so the success of the general plan, in my view, as a practitioner and as a person who tries to prepare these plans, is it clear? Is it coherent? Is it internally consistent? Does it really reflect the vision of the community as we heard it expressed through the project? And of course, Livermore includes many different perspectives and viewpoints. So it can be tough to come to consensus. These are very important decisions that affect the future of the community and many different people's lives in Livermore. So we may not always have perfect agreement, but we really want to do our best to reflect what we hear from the community about how and where Livermore should develop. So at the adoption moment, I would say that success looks like a general plan that has strong support from the community, where everyone can see at least some of their ideas reflected, even if they don't necessarily agree with every single piece of the plan. And beyond that, I think the city and the community are really going to have to be the judges of the success of the general plan, with how easy it is to implement and how reliable it is over time, and how flexible it is to accommodate changing future conditions. Andy, you want to say anything more about success?
I had just two things to add. Well, maybe three. It would be a success after 2-3+ years of work of getting a general plan adopted. So we've been at this for quite a long time. But I think one of the metrics we're going to have to use as a community is that vision statement. Are the things we are putting forward into action going to help us achieve that vision? And we kind of know it when we see it as we move along. And then secondly, or thirdly rather, we're focused just on a land use map at this point in time. The general plan itself is going to have a policy framework where it lists out our specific goals and some objectives to achieve those goals, where we as the city, with council's direction, can build work programs and actions to help achieve those goals. And so we'll have to be in a loop where we're checking and making sure we're working towards the right path. So that's kind of how we're going to have to play this out over time as we implement the general plan and make sure we are being successful, or if we need to reconsider some things that didn't actually pan out the way we had anticipated, kind of like the BART example, right? We had planned around a BART station in Laughlin, and that's just not happening now. So hopefully that answers your questions about how we define success.
No other questions. Just have one final comment from John saying, thanks for this update, very helpful.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate that. Go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to suggest, I mean, we've pointed everyone to the project website. You can sign up to receive emails from the project team about other events and meetings and things like that. So it seems like everyone on the call is pretty interested. I'd encourage you to do that. And as Joanna said, there's a variety of resources on that website as well.
All right. With that, we will release you to enjoy the rest of your Saturday and your weekend. I want to just wish everybody too a happy Thanksgiving. And thank you again. You have my gratitude and appreciation for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you all.